Hey, time for another video. It's Kit, and we're talking about lines. They come in all sorts of different colors, different types, and today I'm gonna be talking to you about which one I use for what type of fishing. All right. Now, put this on the side here. 90% of my fishing these days are with lures. Okay. In fact, I think last year, 2018, I've only touched the lure. No, sorry, I've only touched a bait once, at the very most, maybe. Twice, if I'm lucky. So, most of the fishing, I mean, for this has been happening for years, really. It's mostly with lures. Okay, so there's different types of fishing that I do, and braid is the fishing line of choice. Now, there are several advantages to braid, and I'm pretty sure that you've heard them with a lot of people. And that, for one, it doesn't stretch, so it's very sensitive. Okay, in actuality, it actually stretches. It has a 2% stretch, regardless of what brand it is. Okay, Dyneema, whether it be Dyneema or Spectra, it has a 2% stretch on it. But that's very minuscule, and unless you're fishing great distances away from the boat or at great depth, which we'll talk about in a future video, there is stretch. It's 2%. Okay, now for lures, mostly because I need to have contact with the lure 100% of the time, because sometimes when the fish strikes, okay, a bait, let's say this is my bait right here, okay, so instead of striking and going away, which you would feel even with mono, what they do is take the bait and move forward. Okay, and sometimes you don't really feel that with mono. You just notice that the line goes slack, whereas with braid you actually feel. I guess you need a bit of experience, or have that experience several times before you actually get to know or feel it. But when your line moves, you actually feel, or when you're fishing with braid and the fish goes towards you, before that happens, you actually feel a tick. You know, you just feel it. The vibration gets transmitted. With braid, faster. With mono, you hardly feel it. Okay, so you have to reel as fast as you can and then strike hard, and the fish is there. Once it notices, it gets sting in its mouth, it turns and it runs, and there you are. Okay, with mono, it's very hard to feel because the mono has a lot of stretch, and there's different types of mono. If you didn't know, there's a lot of types of mono, and some of them are made purposely to stretch. That's how some monos, you think that some monos are actually really strong, but it's not. It's just that it has a really big elongation factor. So you think that it's really strong, but in actuality, it just stretches. But yeah, I mean, it contributes to the strength, of course. So, I guess it's very safe to say that whatever type of fishing that you do, there's a perfect line for it. Okay, and for me, I've kind of deduced that if I'm using bait, except when I'm trolling big game. So for dorado, mahi mahi, or whatnot, you'll find that all my reels are actually spooled with mono, and there's a very good reason for that. There's a trade-off between braid and mono. Okay, so with braid, what it does, it magnifies everything. When I say magnify, it really does. I mean, when a small fish pecks on your lure, like take for example, you have a soft plastic such as this one. Okay, when a small fish touches that, with braid you feel it. With mono, it's sometimes very difficult, even for the experienced angler, to feel it because of the stretch. But with braid, you feel everything. Sometimes you even feel the tail moving. Okay? if your system, your rod, reel, line is balanced and sensitive enough, you feel the tail moving. And so once it stops, you know there's something wrong. You set the hook, and bang, the fish is there. And sometimes when fish are really finicky, that happens. Okay, now that's what braid does. It magnifies everything. Okay, guess what else it magnifies? Guess what else it magnifies? Now, if you haven't figured it out, it also magnifies mistakes. Okay? Now, mono is very forgiving at that because of the stretch. So the thing that a lot of people don't like about it is actually what makes it so good, especially for those that are still starting out. I recommend you start with mono rather than starting with braid, because mono teaches you a lot more than braid when it comes to tying knots. Okay, mono is very forgiving, and it's actually something that it makes you less frustrated with a lot of things. Okay, so for guys that are starting out, I would recommend 100% of the time it would be mono, and you'll learn how to differentiate bottom type. When it gets snagged, it's actually sometimes mono is actually easier to get off. And when you're using lures, okay, mono helps a lot because with braid it doesn't stretch, and there's always a tendency for people to actually strike or set the hook faster with braid than with mono. Whereas with mono, you can learn the basic fundamentals of actually reeling in and coming in tight. Okay, what that means is that when a fish hits, instead of striking immediately, you learn the habit of reeling until your line is very tight and you feel the fish, and then set the hook. Okay, I've noticed that a lot of people that start out with braid are often kind of jerky in their fishing, whereas people that start out with mono are quite smooth at that, because they know they've acquired that habit since they were kids. They were been taught to reel in and set the hook when you feel the weight of the fish. Now, you could do that with with braid, but it's just that mono is very forgiving. And one big thing about mono especially is when you're fishing with top waters. Okay, because of that stretch, it gives you a little bit more time before you set the hook, because you know when you're fishing top water, until the line is tight and the fish is running, you shouldn't even set the hook. When you see the fish boiling on top, to inhale your lure, there's a chance that that vacuum actually pushes the lure away from the mouth, as opposed to the water when it goes in, you know, instead of the lure, because it's buoyant. Remember, top waters float. And sometimes I think you'll notice that in the bucket of water, when you try to pick something up that floats, instead of actually having it already in your palm, when you lift up, it just moves away. And it happens exactly the same way when a fish is trying to get your lure. Okay, it happens. Now, with mono, because of the stretch, it actually leaves the lure at its place. Okay, so the mouth is here, it doesn't pull it because mono stretches, so it leaves it a little bit, kind of like a rubber band. And this is one of the reasons why, again, it's easier for people to start out with mono and with braid. Now, with a little bit of experience, you know, for me, I have found that, especially with bait, I like mono or fluorocarbon more than braid because of the stretch. Now, fluorocarbon doesn't stretch as much as mono. So fluorocarbon doesn't stretch as much as mono, so you kind of get the best of both worlds. Okay. The biggest advantage of fluorocarbon, I mean, for me, I tied a leader on here because I was fishing for Dorado. And Dorado are not as sensitive as other fish when it comes to leaders. But see, the thing is, I wanted something a bit thicker because Dorado have small fine teeth, so it's there. But if the fishing was really tough, what I would do is take off this leader and fish it straight, put a small live bait hook there, put a sardine or a mackerel, toss it out, and catch them. Okay, so live bait fishing with fluorocarbon, for me, that's where it shines the most. I know that there are a lot of bass anglers in the States that use fluorocarbon, especially with their bait casters, and hey, you know, that's their type of fishing, and it seems to work. Millions of dollars have been won and lost in that regard, and I cannot say that fishing fluorocarbon lines with lures might be the best recourse for, let's say, saltwater fishing. However, there are some situations where you're fishing for fish that are quite line shy, and fluorocarbon shines there. And when we're talking about fishing for brim or whatnot, and you're using 4-pound test, that's 2 kilos, 2 kilo line with really tiny small bait or lures, and it works wonders. Okay, so there are certain situations even in saltwater where full fluorocarbon line outshines everything. There's some of these actually will have really long sections of fluorocarbon. Sometimes mono. It just depends on what type of fishing I'm doing. Okay, now a long length of mono or fluorocarbon in front of your braid, and we're not talking 3 feet here, okay, or what is that, meter and a half. I'm talking about 5-10 meters of leader material, which is either braid or mono, in front of this. Now it does give you a lot of advantages, and it's not just giving you the distance between your braid and lure. Okay, what it does is actually give you a lot of stretch you wouldn't have otherwise with a short leader or no leader at all. Okay, now a lot of people prefer fishing leaders that are just about, I don't know, 5 feet, and that's all in good, and there's a lot of technical styles of fishing that give you a lot of advantages when you're using short leaders. But for me, I'm not the world's best angler, okay, and I need to have as much of the advantage my side more than on the fish side. So what I usually do is give myself a little bit of a head start when it comes to that. So a long leader helps me a lot. A long leader also prevents me from cutting back, or allows me to cut back a lot, and I only use 1 knot and not shortening my braid, which means that instead of actually, let's say, in 5 trips, because of my short leader getting really short, cut-offs or whatnot, you have to cut, retie, and then you use up a lot of your braid. But for me, since my leaders are really long, what happens is that, I mean, you'll see here, see? I have my leader, see that? A clear bit of monofilament there. They're long. It's not just because it's a wind-on leader, but it's purposely because I need that length to be there so that if I cut back on the leader, I wouldn't have to retie the knot that's underneath. And that's just me and my process, but that's it, you know. And this reel I use for surf casting with bait. Okay, so when I go to an area where I see there's, you know, some nice beaches or whatnot, I would most likely go back there with some reels that I would use for surf casting, like probably at least 1 or 2 rods. Cast out with bait, leave them there while I fish with a lure somewhere, okay, close by, probably 20 meters away, you know, just casting, fishing for other fish, and then when the rod gets hit, then I just run and pick it up. So I fish basically double, or I'm fishing a bait rod or bait rods together with the lure, so I'm fishing, you know, 2 times within a session. Anyway, so yeah, so long leaders with my braid, for very skittish fish, fluorocarbon, live bait or lure, whichever they're biting. I would most likely prefer lures than with bait. If I could get away with lures, it's just a cleaner way. But sometimes I am in a mood for some surf casting, going back to basics and everything, and my choice for that would always be mono, and not even fluorocarbon. It would be mono, and it is because of that stretch. Because when you're fishing with lead, you cast out there and your lead sitting on the bottom. When the waves hit the line, it doesn't move the lead. The line would just give way to the waves, so your bait stays in one place, and that's for me, that's one of the biggest advantages. Obviously, also when you're casting out with braid and it breaks off, immediately and the potential of actually hurting someone is quite high. Whereas with mono, it's that stretch and it kind of feels like a spring and it just drops down after, you know. So it's for me, it's just less dangerous and better for everyone around me, especially when you're in your pendulum casting and, you know, the lead just travels so fast. If it hits someone or a boat or something, it'll puncture a hole, bust a head or something. That's really bad. So mono would always be for my bait fishing, you know. There are some instances where I used braid and regretted it, really. So for me, they all have their place in any fishing system, okay? There is no one line that does everything perfectly. And even so, even with braid, okay, and all its advantages, I still need a bit of stretch there to help me out when I need it. So long leaders for me, up to you if you want shorter leaders, but that's how I do my fishing. So that's it for this video, and hope it gives you a little bit of a perspective on which lines to use for what. And I will see you in the next video.